Okay, now let's add this motion path to our animation. And in this way we are going to learn more about the shape layers and what we can do with them. So to create a path, we are creating a path on different shape layers. Make sure that you didn't select any of the layers, so you would not create a mask on top of them, and select this pen tool. Enable this title action save to create our path from the center by clicking here. You can also hold shift and it will create a straight line without any kind of tilting, and click here on the center. So now we've created this shape layer. We can press enter on keyboard and let's call it path 1. Let's select the selection tool. We can just click on fill and disable fill by pressing on none and click OK. So let's change the color of stroke. Maybe let's set it to this same color and click OK. And let's change the width of stroke. Let's set it something small like 7 or 8. To add more complexity to this path, you can also go to the stroke and change it to linear gradient and click OK. And by this handle we can set this gradient to go from center up to center of our circle. And now we can change the color of this gradient to whichever we like. For example, we can select this color and go from this color to this color and click OK. So now as you can see we have variation of the color, which gives more professional kind of look instead of having just a simple one color. Second thing which we can do, let's just disable this title action save. We can add a bit more complexity. Let's open this path, contents, and this shape, and here in gradient stroke we can change line cap, which is a really cool effect. And if we will set to round cap, just take a look at this line. As you can see, it has squares. If I'm gonna zoom in closer, we have this squared kind of shape, which doesn't really look good. So let's change to round cap. And now as you can see, it much more smoother and rounded. And to add more complexity, we can duplicate this shape layer by pressing Ctrl D and change this shape 1. And change this stroke. And now we can click on this stroke and change it to solid. And let's set this solid to white color. As you can see, it's changed from gradient to the simple stroke. And now if we will change the stroke width to make it thicker like this and change the opacity, we can add this kind of glow, which would look a bit more interesting. Let's maybe set it to 9. So we will have only kind of hint of this glow, or maybe to 11. But don't overdo it. You will take a look. You'll see that if I'm gonna disable this stroke, it doesn't really make so much impact, but overall it adds more complexity to your design. And it feels like it has more to it. So this is why you want to spend a little bit more time on these details, which will make your design more complex and stand out from other projects. Okay, so now we want to animate this path. Basically for animation, we can select our path, and here in contents, we can click add. And here you can see a bunch of options. You can create another shapes, you can create a group and group all of these properties into separate groups if you will need in future. Then you have this fill and gradient stroke, which we already covered. And now we have a complete new section. These things will modify your shapes. For example, zigzag will add exactly as it called, zigzag. And if you will open it, you will be able to change any properties and add more kind of interesting look. And all of these properties are animatable, and if you will want, you will be able to change it. In my case, I want to delete this, and you can basically just go through all of them and see what it does. In our case, we will use only those which really make sense in our design, so wiggle path is also not for us. Basically, today we are going to use repeater, which really powerful and most used effect, and trim paths, which even more used effect. Also, we will use twist because it's really fun. Basically, it will cover most of your needs in motion design. So let's use trim path for our animation. So I've selected trim path, and now we can just animate this end and start percentage. Here is the start. I want to set this end to 0 and set a keyframe. Then when this motion ends, let's set it to 100%. And now as you can see, it goes away, but this still stays up here. So we want to make sure that this also goes away. We will use start option, and just about here we can create a keyframe for the start, and here let's set it to 100%, so it will trim our path from the start to the end. Let's set it to 100%, and basically with this animation of the end, as you can see from 0 to 100%, we are drawing this line, and with this animation with the start, we are animating this kind of beam. And now what we left to do is to change these keyframes so this animation would look more like a path of our circle. So first of all, let's concentrate on this end animation. I'm gonna select these keyframes and move it over. And let's select this last keyframe, go to graph editor, and also copy this kind of motion which we've created for our circle, which basically repeats this fast movement at the start. And you can already see that it's drawing a line, and basically you just want to copy this motion, like this center of your square, drawing this path. So once you'll get this motion, you can now add this motion of deleting itself. But now we want to do exact opposite. We want to start it smooth and slow, and then fast at the end. And for really good animation, you want these two keyframes to overlap a bit like this. So in this way, it will look more organic. So as you can see, my Adobe software crashed. Okay, so I remade all of this, what we did before. So this is a good idea to remember this shortcut, Control Save. Okay, now we have this animation. And once again, you make sure that your keyframes these overlaps. And then just move this path below this texture and circle. So it would be below of our shapes. And maybe let's press F9 on this last keyframe, so it would be a bit slower at the end. And by the way, we can always cut this path to this moment. So we would know that this path goes only from 0 second to second. It would be much easier visibly to see where your path starting animation. So now I'm pressing 0 on numpad to see preview, and it looks pretty good. And this is our first path. So as you remember from preview, this second path is much more interesting, and we will create it in the next video. See you in the next video. Okay, now let's add this more complex path. So first of all, we want to create a new path, a new shape layer. Make sure that you didn't select anything. Go to pen tool and just draw from this point. Click here. Then let's go to this point below and click here. And if you will click and hold, you'll be able to create this kind of Bezier motion. And let's go back to this first one. And we can also click and drag to create this circle. As you remember from motion path, we would want to have these handles parallel to each other and also would have same kind of width. So now we can just scroll through this animation and make sure that this path is about on the center of our circle. So let's move it to the left a bit, here as well, scroll through, and just adjust it a bit to make sure that it looks right. Okay, it looks pretty good. Now what we want to do is to rename it to the path 2, because it's our second path. We can change our stroke to maybe 11. And here where we can introduce more color to our gradient. We can go to stroke and change it to this linear gradient and click OK. Then select the selection tool to be able to see this gradient. And we can change these both points. For example, this second point, we can set this below and this one on top. And now by clicking on this stroke, we can introduce as many colors as we want. For example, this one we can set even to a bit more cyan greenish color. Then here at the middle, we can introduce more of yellow color, bright yellow. And here in the end, we can select this final color and maybe change it to this as well. And click OK. And now as you can see, we have a much more colorful path, which will add more interesting look to our animation. Also, you already know this cool trick where you can just duplicate your shape and change this gradient stroke by selecting it and setting this stroke to solid color. We can make it a lot bigger, like to 22. And in stroke, we can change this opacity to smaller value like 77. So it will also have a bit of glow. And now, as you know, we can animate this path with trim path. So let's click here on add and click on trim path. And if we will open this trim path, we basically want to repeat this kind of animation which we created earlier. Just make sure that your path starts about there where we will start our animation. It will be visually easier to see where this animation starts. So it looks like it will start about here. Let's animate our end position, set it to 0, create a keyframe, and here where it ends, let's set it to 100. And now we have this kind of animation. We can also select this final keyframe and add this kind of curved motion. And now what we want to have is slow movement at the start. So let's select this keyframe as well and also add this kind of animation. And now basically by changing this curve, we need to make sure that it stays behind this circle. So now it looks like it's going too fast. So we can just tweak this curve. Okay, now it looks pretty good, but here we can see that it a bit doesn't keep up. And we don't really have to change everything in curves. Once we have this basic animation, we can just exit this graph editor and then just tweak this animation speed by tweaking these keyframes. And by simply spreading apart or squeezing them together, you can get this animation which will repeat the animation of the circle. By the way, you can just deselect your layer to see it better. And now as you can see, we have this perfect animation, which looks great. But what we can also see that we have this rough cut. And to fix this, we want to go to the stroke of each shape. So here in stroke, we want to change this butt cap to round cap, which will fix this issue. And also here on shape 1, we want to change this gradient stroke from butt cap to round cap. Now it looks much more beautiful. And finally, we want to add animation to our start. So it will start to disappearing as well. So maybe about here, we want to create a keyframe. And a bit later, like here, we want to set to 100%. Now we want to have also this slow movement at the start and slower movement here at the end. And we can just tweak this kind of curve to get any look which you like. And also by tweaking these keyframes, you can change the speed of animation. And finally, you can press 0 on numpad to see the final result. As you can see, we have really smooth and nice animation. And if you want to have a bit more faster kind of animation, you can also tweak these curves to have a bit more spike. So with this spike of the start animation, you can make sure that you have this kind of more dramatic look. And at this point, it really helps to change the path and set it below the circle and texture, so we would see this final result. Okay, now we have this kind of animation of this line with the different kind of gradient, which looks even more interesting than this first path. But to add even more complexity, we can just duplicate this path, just select it and press Ctrl D to duplicate it, and simply just press S on keyboard to change the scale and make it a bit smaller like this. And now we can just open this path 3, go to the contents, and here in this stroke we can change this stroke width to smaller value, which is our glow, and this shape 1, which is our core, we can change stroke as well to maybe 7. So this one will be a lot more thinner. And what is cool about these shape layers, that you can also add a little dash between them. go to this shape layer, which is our core. As you can see, it's not a glow one, this is with the color. And if we will go to gradient stroke, we can open it and we can click on this plus sign. And as you can see, we've added some dashes. And if we will click another time, it will add gaps. So let's increase amount of gaps and let's make it these dashes a bit longer. Something like this looks fine. And as you can see, we already have this pretty cool animation. And one thing which you can also change is go to taper and change this start length. Basically, it will taper this end here, which is also a pretty cool effect. I didn't really do it in preview for this class, but I thought it's a really cool effect, which you should know. And finally, to add a bit more randomness to it, you can change the color gradient. So as you remember, this shape 1 is with the color gradient. We can just select this shape 1 and we can just tweak these colors. For example, we can add a bit different color if you want. But for this example, I feel like this works fine. And final thing which I want to show you, that you can select this path, which is smaller one, and press U on keyboard to see our animation. And you can just tweak this start animation. Make sure to change only the start animation, because this end animation is really crucial. It's when it draws this line. But if you will tweak this start animation, you will add a bit of randomness, which will add more complexity to this effect. And exactly the same I did with this last path here. This is why we are not going to make this last path, because it's exactly the same as this first path. And I don't want to waste any time of this class. So in the next video, I'm going to show you how you can create this animation word, which is a really cool part of this class. See you in the next video.